Hi guys, just before we start this episode, I just wanted to pop in here and say that we had some issues pop up that we noticed it while editing. There is a section towards the end of the episode where my voice in particular is a little more echoey. We're still learning all the tips and tricks and all that comes with podcasting, so apologies for that. But we will be working to make sure that doesn't happen again in the future. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Hello, welcome back to The Couple That Pods Together. I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Chris. Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, happy Valentine's Day.
It's
a week
February.
early.
Yeah.
But February, it's the month for it.
Yeah. So being that romance is on everyone's minds, we wanted to talk about some tropes in media, movies mostly, but also some video games.
Yeah.
In case you're unfamiliar with the term, a trope is like it's like an archetype or a pattern. I like to think of them as building blocks. It's kind of like something that occurs very commonly in media, and you can kind of trace that kind of similar stories across several kinds of stories. So the ones that we're talking about today are romance tropes, mostly, like I said, mostly in movies, some games as well. So I wanted to start with one that you are well known to be a fan of, which is enemies to lovers.
Yes.
Could you describe the trope first?
So I'm going to describe what I believe enemies to lovers is, which a lot of things that claim to be enemies to lovers are not, in fact, enemies to lovers. So, I view enemies to lovers as just what it says. The two,
Participants?
The participants.
There you go.
Yeah, sure. The two participants in the relationship, the love story that's being told, they start off as enemies to each other. And they do not like each other. They do not want anything to do with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as the story progresses, events occur, putting them together, and then they develop feelings, and then they become lovers.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you for some examples, because I made a list of 4 examples, and 3 of them you said, that's not enemies to lovers, and the last one you said, I've never seen that. So what are some good examples?
So, of course, I'm struggling a little bit to, come up with a really good one off the top of my head. My issue is there's a lot of ones that like to proclaim they're enemies to lovers when really they're just rivals. The people don't actually hate each other. They just like to egg each other. And that can also be a good one.
So yeah, that's also worth mentioning that enemies to lovers is a blurred line sometimes with rivals to lovers, which is slightly different.
Yes, and since I'm very into the fantasy sci-fi of it all, usually when I think of enemies to lovers, they straight up want to kill each other. And that is a real possibility of what could happen. Okay. Tangent. One of my favorites, though it kind of didn't happen in the movie.
Go for it.
But that, Kylo Ren and Rey.
Yeah.
100%. That's the kind of vibe that enemies to lovers is for me. They straight up, in the first movie they meet up together, are trying to kill each other. And then shenanigans happen. And then they create a bond that is lending itself to the lovers aspect.
Sure. I would
That's why I
argue
shipped them for so long.
I would argue that Kylo Ren is not trying to kill Rey in the first movie, but that's something we can get into deeper.
I mean, we could also argue that, but it's also we can argue that later.
Yeah, that's a Star Wars thing, but
we'll
I see
be
what
talking
you're
about Star Wars at another time. It'll probably have its very own episode.
That is your example, which
that's my good example. A book example, and I'm just thinking about it because I'm rereading it for the romantasy girlies out there. Fourth Wing Though I have arguments on that one too. After a certain point, that stopped being enemies to lovers, and people can't call it enemies to lovers anymore. But it starts out pretty decently. There's another thing that happens sometimes in enemies to lovers tropes that I don't feel fits in, and it's the girl thinks that they're enemies to lovers, and then the guy reveals, hey, loved you the whole time. And it's like, no, that doesn't fit the genre.
Right.
I could go on about this for a while.
So the example that I had listed was Avatar / Pocahontas, because those are the same story.
They are the same.
But I had that listed under enemies to lovers, but you disagreed.
I disagree. I think that one is a lot more star-crossed lovers, a la Romeo and Juliet. You got the two warring sides, and yes, they each belong to a different side on that war, but they themselves don't view the other one as an enemy, per se. Avatar, a little bit. But if we look at, like, the straight Pocahontas Disney version Pocahontas story,
I think that's, like, the one thing that they differ on, is that, like, in Avatar, they straight up come in as they are under no illusions that they are allies. Whereas Pocahontas, the white men come in and they're like, no, we're totally your friends.
Yeah.
Which definitely makes these, that's like the one split, I would say, between these stories.
Yeah, I'd agree to that. So yeah, that one, I would argue, is a little more star-crossed versus enemies. I mean, I guess you can make the argument that Avatar starts off as a soft enemies to lovers.
Okay.
I'll give it a soft enemies to lovers.
Okay. So, for enemies to lovers, then, would you say that, like, anything contemporary doesn't really fit, save for, like...
honestly would say that. See, like, your basic average contemporary story, I feel like the most you're gonna get is rivals. Now, you start getting the stories that are, like... You got, like, the mafia, the gangs, where people are actually killing people.
Right.
Like, Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
There you go.
That's one. Found it.
Nailed it. Because another example that I put on here was Parks and Rec.
Yes.
Because initially when Ben Wyatt enters the scene, he and Leslie do not get along at all.
Right.
Because he is disillusioned with the government, and she sees him as just someone to come in and chop up their department without seeing the human cost. So they really butt heads at the beginning.
They do, and I think we've talked about this a little bit off camera, which we shouldn't do anymore. Now that we have this podcast, we should not talk outside of it. You and I just only have our conversations through this podcast.
Not allowed.
But I at first was like, I don't think Parks and Rec is enemies to lovers. However, I don't think it'd be considered rivals to lovers because Ben and Leslie are not trying for the same thing, which is also another thing. Rivals to lovers, usually they're trying for the same goal, but they butt heads on how best to do it, and sometimes they like to sabotage each other in that. I would say, as far as contemporary goes, Parks and Rec probably is the closest you're gonna get to an enemies to lovers.
Okay.
But it's also hard because I view, like, Leslie was more so on the side of he's my enemy, where Ben didn't view Leslie as his enemy ever.
I feel
and that's another thing.
This is, like, why I wanted to get into this with you on the podcast, is because, like, most people would define enemies to lovers as, like, oh, they didn't like each other. Now they do. But you're like, no, they're not trying to murder each other.
There's levels. And that's the thing. So, like, since it's one of my favorites, it's so upsetting when someone tells you, hey, this is enemies to lovers, and then I consume the media, whether it be books, movies, or whatever, and I just go, it didn't hit. But the thing is, Parks and Rec hit. And I can't tell if it's because it's an enemies to lovers, or if it's just, I really liked the characters.
Yeah.
You know?
And they're quite famous for going, like, even off camera, they're like, we're fans of our characters and them being together.
Yes.
So, like, they would have conversations of, like, what their date nights looked like and stuff like that, which is adorable.
Listen, sometimes I just like people to be angsty at each other, and that's a lot of what enemies to romance is, or enemies to lovers trope is them being angsty, them fighting with each other.
Right.
And then coming together. I like that a lot. So that's probably why Enemies to Lovers is one of my favorites. And I will concede Parks and Rec is an Enemies to Lovers.
So the one I have on here that you weren't as familiar with was I put down 10 Things I Hate About You.
Yes.
Which I don't know. I can't remember if you said you hadn't seen it or it just been so long that it's...
I think I saw it once and it was a long time ago. It's also the hard thing is I've seen so many parodies. And 10 Things I Hate About You in itself is not really a parody, but it's a twist on...
It's a modern retelling of Taming of the Shrew.
Right. So, and I've seen a lot of other modern
retellings of Taming of the Shrew.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like, I know vaguely enough about the story, but I can't remember the actual details of that specific movie.
It's very evident at the beginning because it's such a ridiculous premise, which is... I think it's Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays the young kid. Mm-hmm. But he wants to bring this girl to the prom or their dance or whatever.
Oh, but her sister
doesn't have a date. And the dad is like, unless your sister has a date, you can't go either. So then this kid and his buddies hatch a plan to hook up this lonely drifter, Heath Ledger, with her older sister so that they go to the dance together, and then he can bring his girl to the dance.
Gotcha. Yes, that's coming closer to me. That brought up something, but if you want to keep talking about 10 Things I Hate About You, we can.
I'm fine. Go for it.
So, I know you don't watch it, but I do. Bridgerton. Season 2. That's very much Enemies to Lovers. And it has a somewhat similar plot line, if those that don't know. The second season of Bridgerton fully revolves around this one guy, Anthony Bridgerton. He's like, that's it, I'm getting married, I'm doing it, I'm just gonna try and find the girl who's gonna annoy me the least in life, because he's fallen out of love, like he doesn't believe in love anymore. Right. And he finds this girl, she's the most popular girl, she's new on the scene. He's like, cool, that's the girl I want. Her sister, who shows up, is like, hey, no, because I heard that you're only looking for someone just to marry and you don't care. My sister deserves love. So they become antagonists to each other and they fight each other a lot. And spoiler alert for Bridgerton, but Bridgerton follows a very, very formulaic, so I think we all know where it goes. But spoiler ahead, they get together. I suppose spoilers for all of these things we're talking about, because we are talking about the overall storyline of them.
Right. Avatar and Pocahontas, it's sort of like that's the premise, not a spoiler.
Right. And then some of these have been out for a while, so everyone knows. Bridgerton has been released in the last, I think the second season came out in 2021 or 22. I can't remember fully. But I just sensed that was somewhat newer, quote unquote. Yeah. I wanted to make that known before spoiling.
That's a good one. Which I will transition here because I don't know. This is one that I'm not as familiar with, and I listed it under Enemies to Lovers only because I could not find enough examples of our next trope, which is fake dating, and I wanted to list The Proposal and have a conversation about that trope. But The Proposal was the only example that I could find.
You didn't tell me that because you listed The Proposal under Enemies to Lovers, and I just kind of had a moment of going, excuse me. They don't like each other in the beginning, and that is true, but that is very much not an enemies to lover trope. That is a fake dating trope, which is also one of my favorites.
I think by the loosest layman's terms of enemies to lovers, it fits. But you are much more of a...
Not by my standards.
Yeah.
But it definitely has... See, fake dating, though, that trope... It is exactly what it is. Two people pretend to date, and then they end up falling for each other in the course of fake dating each other. Mm-hmm. A lot of fake dating also has people being like, hey, we don't get along, It's why
Right.
we're not actually dating.
Right.
But yeah, the proposal definitely has that fake dating trope. She needs to basically get married so she can stay in the country so she doesn't get deported.
Right.
And he agrees to it because he works for her, and she promises him like a lot of money or a raise or something just to do it
Right.
just to be married in on paper only. But then he's like, well, my family's never gonna go for this unless we actually make it a reality. So they go visit his family. Shenanigans ensue. Betty White is dancing around a fire pit.
Betty White is also there.
And then there's a nice little chant of what's that song called? To the windows, to the walls.
Oh.
Chant around the fire.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that movie. For rom-coms, it's one of my favorites, I think.
Yeah. So I guess in case it wasn't evident before, I am not a huge rom-com person.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay. I get it.
And we'll dive into like my kind of favored style of romance later, but I think that romance is something that happens parallel to life.
Mm-hmm.
So in my opinion, romance is never really the main thing. I know that's not how it always ends up in life or in media, but like romance by itself is usually not like a strong enough pull to draw me.
So
Does that make sense?
Yes, you like romance as a subplot.
Yes.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
I don't need that necessarily. I need, in movies, I will say. In movies, that can be what it is. Now, if I'm reading a book, I kind of want something more. That's why I'm big on fantasy, and then the romances in fantasy like really hook me. But most of the time, they are a subplot of what's actually going on.
And I mean, it cannot be overstated how different of a beast movies are from books.
Oh yeah.
And I know that gets blurred because we turn books into movies
all the time.
All the time. But you spend so much more time in a character's head in a book as opposed to a movie. I think that romance works a little bit better in a book also because you are in their head.
Right. That's valid because you're knowing what they're feeling because you're basically being told what they're feeling.
Yeah.
Rather than someone trying to show it to you.
Through, like, what, a longing look?
Yeah, right, a longing look with music underscoring
a blink and you'll miss it reference.
Yep, unless they want to have a weird, cringy voiceover to tell you what's going on in their head.
Right.
Sometimes that works, most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah.
So...
But as far as jumping back to fake dating, I was going to say an example that you can talk about that I can't, again, is Anyone But You. Is that fake dating with Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney?
Yes. That was a good one.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed it. It was a great thing. I will say, if you're comparing it to a lot of other rom-coms, it's actually just okay. And it feels weird to say because I enjoyed that movie a lot. However, it's just because we've been a little starved for rom-coms.
Yeah.
Movies have kind of, I mean, there's more probably on Netflix that go like straight to Netflix that people don't hear about anymore.
The mid-budget movie is just gone, which is bizarre.
But yeah, that one's really fun. It's that whole trying to get people off our backs. Stop annoying us with these things, so let's just pretend to date. And then, feelings about... I'm such a sucker for that one, too. I just got done reading, sorry to change it up, but a book series, and they had fake dating in one of the books, and it's fun because I think with fake dating, it takes a lot of another trope, which is the miscommunication trope, which... is just they miscommunicate. And that one bothers me a lot because it's like if you guys would just talk to each other, it would make sense. But what I like in fake dating is often one of them realizes they're developing feelings, but they're like, but this is fake. And we said it was fake,
Right.
so I can't actually communicate my feelings because they don't feel this way. Just because they're doing these things, it's because this is fake.
And sometimes I don't know how I drew this conclusion because, like I said, I don't do a lot of these, but sometimes it fuels into it where it's like, I'm feeling things for this person, but wait, we're not supposed to. They're tricking me, and that feeds into them, like, not liking each other more.
Yes.
Because they're like, they're trying a lot harder than I am, or they're doing this better than I am.
Fake dating's a good one, too.
Yeah.
Since we've been talking about books and movie adaptations of books, there's another very popular trope out there. The love triangle.
Ooh, it's a big one.
It's a big one, and we have two of the big young adult
Yep.
ones coming up. Big one, Twilight.
Twilight. That was like a key part of the marketing for that series.
Who was it gonna be?
Are you Team Edward or Team Jacob?
And it's so interesting to me, like, and I mean, this goes into the movies because all the books got adapted.
Yeah.
All the books got adapted into movies. And so the funny thing about a love triangle, I think, very hard to do in just one movie or one book.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Unless that's your sole focus.
Yes, it can be done. But what I think is interesting about Twilight, and then one we're going to talk about after it, is that triangle doesn't appear until maybe the second one. And then it becomes the big deal in the third one.
Yeah. And I don't know. I cannot, like I said, again, I cannot speak for Twilight, but for a lot of books with the love triangle in it, I feel like you can see them setting it up a mile away.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, as a book reader of Twilight, what was it like going through it when you didn't know? Like, was it obvious who she was going to end up with?
See, I felt it was obvious.
Yeah.
But I liked the other guy more. So it was hard for me reading it because I'm going, hey, look at this guy who's not keeping her from her friends, who's loving her as she is, all this stuff. Oh, but the only reason we're kind of humoring this guy right now is because the other guy's gone.
Yeah,
And-
that one is
and
like
then
a
it-
very...
And then in the third one, I mean, spoilers for Twilight, everybody, but it's been out for a while and everyone's talked about it.
Yeah.
The third book / movie, you know she has no feelings for this other guy. Despite everyone going the whole Team Jacob, Team Edward, she's always been clear that her feelings were only for Edward. And Jacob was, if I'm being honest, the friend she was stringing along who she knew had feelings
that's
for
a bummer.
her. And she used that friendship to, like, help her out in situations. That's how I viewed it because, I mean, he would be there offering her comfort because he was the warm one. Edward was the cold one because he's a vampire.
Ew.
And so, like, when she was cold in a tent, like, she cuddled up with him because he exuded warmth, whereas the other guy couldn't do it. They lament about how he's so sad that he can't do that for her. And...
Well, don't be a vampire.
yeah,
You dingus.
Don't be a vampire, falling in love with a human, and then refusing to turn that human for some reason. Like, if you're gonna do it, like... I understand why he didn't, but also don't get all sad and whatnot when you refuse to be the one to change her. So yeah, I think, especially with Twilight, I felt like it was very easy to see who she was going to choose because, at least in the books, and honestly, I haven't read these since high school, so maybe I'm misremembering, but it felt as if in the books, it was very clear where she stood.
Right.
And so it was like, I mean, you're reading it and going, well, maybe Jacob would be able to, like, get her on his side. I don't know. And then it didn't really happen. It's Jacob was around because she liked him as a friend, but refused to kind of fully tell him it was only ever going to be friend.
Right.
She does, but, like, then
Not
does
me.
other things.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Jacob also wasn't terrible and, like, constantly pursuing her after she told him that she wasn't interested. There's a lot of things in Twilight, let's be honest.
I apologize. My experience with Twilight is I have seen the first movie. That's it.
That's fair.
I am excited to get to.
Interested that you've actually even seen the first movie of Twilight. I'm proud of you for that.
Thank you. I actually wanted to talk about this next one because I can speak on it to a greater degree, which is The Hunger Games.
Yes. I'm just going off of, so with Twilight, I knew where that was going in that love triangle.
Right.
I felt it was a little harder in Hunger Games to figure out where she was going.
So, yeah, I think...
Or if she was even going to go with either of them then, honestly.
I think in hindsight, it is much easier to see that Katniss and Peeta were going to end up together. But it's because of the way that it's written, which is very clever in the sense that Katniss does not realize how strongly she feels about Peeta. Mm-hmm. So all of her descriptions of him are very, 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 very vivid. And she's talking about, like, his eyes and his hair and, like, all of his physical characteristics, as well as constantly remembering every kind thing he's ever done. But she's delusional. So she's constantly, like, every time she catches herself thinking about Peeta, she's like, well, no, I don't like Peeta, though. I like Gale.
Yeah, but at the same time, she doesn't even have those thoughts. Like,
right, it's not in those certain terms. Yeah.
But, like, she's not even thinking of it that way. She's thinking, like, Gale's her best friend.
Right.
And has been there through everything. The only reason she's gotten so close to Peeta is because of being put through the Hunger Games. And I think that's what she's telling herself, is going, oh, well, it's just because we've gone through this thing. It's just because this. That's the only reason why I'm noticing these things in Peeta. And we're not talking about Gale, because we've known Gale for forever, so we're not noticing new things about him. Right. Except when we do. And it's not good things about Gale. But I would say, I mean, Love Triangle is obviously the overarching plot, but Hunger Games has a little bit of fake dating, too.
It does, you're right.
It does.
That's a great example.
It is. I'm so proud of myself.
Yeah, nice. You really pulled that around. But I think it becomes evident towards the end, like somewhere in the second book of Hunger Games, I feel like it becomes evident that only, like, Katniss and Peeta are the only people who understand each other at that point.
Yeah, maybe.
And I know that's a little bit of trauma bonding, and that should be separate from romantic feelings.
Yeah.
That's not always the case in media or real life. Well,
and at the same time, you look at Gale, who can't relate to Katniss.
Right.
And in him trying to comfort her after the games, he fails miserably. He can't do anything for her. And that's not necessarily a failing on Gale. It's just that she's been through something he can never understand. And he thinks he understands it. He thinks he understands that she went through something horrible, but he, even though he can't understand it, I feel like he thinks he can. Yeah. And he knows how to help Katniss. When he doesn't, and she doesn't have it in her to tell him no, because she doesn't have it in her to tell anyone, because she's like, well, none of you get it, and I don't want you to get it.
Right. It's not something she wishes upon them.
Yeah, she doesn't want people to understand her. She's like, this is terrible. The people who understand me, I also wish they didn't understand me. I don't want anyone else more to understand me, because I don't want anyone else to go through this. Which is, and I mean, I will say though, there was a point I was reading the last Hunger Games book, and I was going, yeah, she just might go off.
And pick neither of them.
Honestly, I thought that was a big possibility.
Secret option C.
There was a long time where she's just, and actually for most of the book, she's not even thinking about romance. She don't even care. Like, Gale's like, why are you looking at Peeta? And she's like, I'm not even looking at Peeta. Look, I'm trying to stay alive here. This ain't it. It's the boys who are putting her in the love triangle. Yes. And Katniss is over here just going, can I please just survive and keep my family alive?
Which is brings up a very petty side tangent that I want to talk about with the love triangle.
Yes.
Which is, it's usually either one person has feelings for two people, or one person has feelings for one person who has feelings for a different person. Mm-hmm. Those aren't triangles.
No.
A
I
true
know what
love
would make
triangle,
it a triangle is this person loves this person.
Person C loves person A.
Yeah.
Yeah, close the loop.
Yeah, you gotta have the A loves B, B loves C, and C loves A. Someone needs to find me.
Let's get out there and find some real messy love triangles.
Someone in the comments, please. I'm begging. I want to read or watch. I need a story where that's the case because I want to see how messy it gets.
Because it's usually a line of love where this is a great segue into the final one that I threw up here because we just watched it this week.
Before we go there,
I
want to talk a little bit about it'll get messy, but something that I feel like gets close. It's been a while since I've actually watched or consumed any media of it. I feel like A Midsummer Night's Dream, not Midsummer. Okay. Sorry, that's a completely different movie.
I was like, did I completely misread what that movie is about?
No, that movie is traumatic.
A Midsummer's
Night's Dream. Shakespeare. Yeah. I feel like that one.
Bill Shakespeare.
Gets really close to having a triangle, except there's 4 people. It gets very close.
The love quadrilateral.
Almost. For real, almost. Because What's His Toes comes in and forces people to fall in love with other people, so everyone has their favorite coupling, but he messes up. And so there is that kerfuffle of people in love with people they shouldn't be, and I don't think it's quite there, but I think it gets close.
Okay.
Anyway.
But what I was gonna bring up was Crazy Stupid Love, which we just rewatched.
Yes.
I was counting it as my first watch. I had seen it piecemeal because I worked at the theater when it came out. But that one it was actually my least favorite part of the movie was there's this kid who he's in love in air quotes, with his babysitter, and the babysitter is in love with the dad. Mm-hmm. That is a line.
That is a line.
In multiple uses of the term, that is a line.
Yep.
It's weird. I don't think it's a subplot that aged well.
It didn't age well. It's at the same time, I'll say, it makes sense that a 13-year-old kid could fall in love or think he's in love or be infatuated with their babysitter if they're still having a babysitter at that age. I think it was more so for his little sister than him. He just wasn't old enough to watch his little sister.
Yeah.
But had grown up with this older woman. And
she's 17.
17, only 4 years older than him. But at that age, major difference. I can see how a kid thinks they're in love with their babysitter.
Absolutely.
I can see how a babysitter falls in love with, or not falls in love, has, a crush on a kid's dad.
Right.
All of these things make sense. The way the movie goes about resolving that,
yes.
Different story.
So, again, spoilers for
Crazy Stupid Love.
How old is this movie? 14 years old?
Yeah.
So how it resolves is she gets advice from a classmate to basically send nudes to the dad. Mm-hmm. She takes them but puts them in an envelope in her drawer, which her parents find. She gets in trouble. He gets in trouble. But they eventually clear up that he had no idea they were being taken.
I was going to say, let's be honest, the dad, no clue.
Yeah.
He was in love with his wife, has always been in love with his wife, never deviates. Truthfully.
Yeah. And then... Yeah. But the thing that I think does not resolve well or ages well is that as a consolation prize for...
the kid.
The kid, she gives the nudes to the 13-year-old kid.
Yeah. They have a whole nice moment of him being like, hey, I figure you like my dad, in a few years I'll look like my dad and we'll be older, and guess what? The age difference won't matter once we're both older. And it's like, hey, that makes sense. She says something very nice to the kid saying, hey, that sounds like a good idea. Feel free to try and, like, come find me once you're
It's like a
an
very,
adult.
like, hey, listen, I'll give you some space, but, like, I'm not giving up.
Yes.
In, like, a very playful way.
In a very playful way, and it's like, okay, the kid's a kid.
You're right.
And she handles it as well as a 17-year-old girl could handle it in that moment with the talking.
Yeah.
And saying, like, telling him, like, he's fine, like, all that stuff, and that, yeah, maybe when they're older, they'll come back together. You know, it's, lets the kid have his little hope, but, like, also understand. And then, here's where, where...
So weird.
I need to calm down. And then, where it crosses the line, is she's like, well, to tide you over until then, and then she gives him the nudes.
It's like a very, like, here's looking at you, kid, and just, like, gives him the, like, naked photos.
It's just like, girl, for one, what are you doing?
Like, what is that?
And for another, he is a child. Like, yes, he's 13. 13-year-old boys are discovering stuff at that age. Whatever.
It's weird.
But it's weird. And you could be arrested for child pornography. Let's just be honest. Anyway,
it's a really good movie. I think it handled it very masterfully. All of the plot lines that they kind of weave together. And even though it is strictly like a rom-com, I feel like they threw so many different concepts and they threw so many different storylines of what love looks like.
Yes, and I like that.
They weaved them together very adeptly.
I agree. Yes, because you got a married couple, like, going through, like, a stint, so they decide to separate. You got, like, the playboy who's just constantly not thinking about any, like, formal relationship. He's just, like, a numbers game, honestly. It feels like for him. Just like, nothing real for him. And then you got like a little bit of office romance. Like, you got two coworkers who hooked up. You got, like, and obviously the
Emma Stone's character, who is, like, in a relationship with Josh Groban.
Wild.
That's Josh Groban. But she's kind of waiting for that relationship to move forward.
She's in a safe relationship in what she thinks is good enough. She feels she doesn't need any passion. She's just like, he's a good guy, he's safe, we're going on the step. And then she's with him for so long, and then she thinks he's going to propose. He doesn't. And then when she brings it up, he's like, whoa, I need to think about that. And she just kind of realizes that she just wasted a lot of time with someone who wasn't even thinking of a future with her.
Yeah.
And she wanted something more, because her safe option was not necessarily safe.
Right.
Or enjoyable.
Which is why she runs into the open arms of the more quote-unquote dangerous guy.
Right,
the guy who's running around picking up girls in bars.
Because there's passion there, and there's excitement. And I don't think she fully registers that it's going to turn into anything. And she just wanted some excitement.
Because she's heckling him once she gets back to his place, being like, oh, okay, how does this go now?
Yeah.
And, like, he's kind of thrown off guard by it, but that also kind of helps break down his walls a little bit, too.
So, yeah. So it's got a lot of, like, I like the name. I think I read that Steve Carell didn't like the name of it.
Crazy Stupid Love?
Yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, it had gone through several different titles, too, because I think the director was offering, like, a cash prize to anyone on set who could give him a name that they liked. Like, they could not figure out what to call the movie.
But, like, Crazy Stupid Love makes sense because it talks about how, like, crazy love can be, how stupid love can be, how, like, love or infatuation, whatever you want to call it in those different forms, how it can just, like, spiral into, like, chaos.
Right.
I think it's a fitting title, in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right, so now, going in a completely different direction.
Yes.
We're going to talk about another, I don't know if necessarily trope, but more genre.
Genre, and this is where I referenced earlier that this is kind of my preferred style of ingesting romance, which is the adventure romance.
It's some good ones.
And I think it's not only romantic because there are people who are realizing their feelings for each other, but it's also romantic in the sense that they're out there living life. You know,
Yes.
they're doing things. They're absorbing the full scope of what existence has to
Honestly,
offer.
I would love it if adventure romance made a comeback
And
in cinema.
I'll start with Princess Bride, which I think is a good jumping off point because
Yeah.
it's
Is this the kissing book?
is this the kissing book? Because it is, you don't think it starts out to be a romance, but it definitely, like, it really feels like this sweeping adventure. But at some point, you're like, well, this is about them.
Oh, I have an argument with you on that.
Go for it.
I think you know right from the get-go that it's a story about romance. What are you talking about?
Let me rephrase. No, there's too much. Let me sum up. I didn't plan that, but
Let me explain.
It's just a happy accident.
No, there's too much. Let me sum up.
I think once you get through the prologue and it turns into Buttercup being kidnapped, I think it feels like it's just going to shift straight to adventure.
Okay, I will give you that because, yes, the beginning starts off, there's romance.
Yes.
I also forget that a plot is that we think that he dies.
We think that he's just not there anymore.
We do think that Wesley dies.
Yeah.
And that is why she's so sad, and that is why she's, like, gonna marry this prince. Is he a prince or a king?
Prince, I believe.
Prince. And, like, she's just kind of distraught at this point. She's like, whatever, life doesn't mean anything anymore. And then she gets kidnapped, and adventure pursues. And I'll give you that it kind of deviates from the romance because the romantic interest is not there anymore.
Correct.
So I'll give you that.
And I like that as they go through all these adventures, as they go through, what is it, the swamps of fire, the rodents of unusually large size, it starts to be, you just see them latching onto each other more and more and more. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the fun part about the adventure romance is, yeah, you're wondering if they're going to make it through alive, but you're also wondering if they're going to, what their relationship is going to be afterwards.
Like, I'd argue sometimes in adventure romances, like, you might not know going in that it's going to be an adventure romance, but at some point there's an inkling.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know they're going to get together. The question is how.
Right.
Princess Bride's a great one. Obviously, there's a lot we could talk about on the Princess Bride.
I think the biggest example of a miss from Hollywood is, and let me explain. Pirates of the Caribbean. Because I think Hollywood looked at that and went, people love Johnny Depp, and they centered everything else around pirates around Jack Sparrow. When I think the thing that really made pirates work was Will and Elizabeth.
I agree. I don't know why you had to, like, prep me.
Because, like, I was about to call Pirates of the Caribbean a miss.
See, here's the thing. Are you calling Pirates of the Caribbean a miss, or are you calling all the Pirates of the Caribbean after the third one a miss?
Yes, after the third one, but I think
arguments can be made about the second and third movie.
I'll
give you that.
That's kind of also where I was going.
I'll give you that.
They shifted the focus from, they were there and they definitely developed past the first movie, but I also feel like there was a definite shift to where people were like, look at this jester, this clown figure in Jack Sparrow.
I mean, yes, especially in the third one. However, I will say in Pirates of the Caribbean 2, I think it's still, like, Will and Elizabeth are still the central romance. But it's also talking about, hey, it does what every movie does when they get a sequel and the couple ends up after the end. There's got to be something going on. And I, for the life of me, can't remember why Elizabeth and Will are fighting in the first moment of the second one, but they're not happy with each other.
Yeah, I can't remember what kicks it off, but it
For some
culminates
reason.
with Jack and Elizabeth kissing, and then Jack gets eaten by a kraken.
Well,
And that's like
yes.
what they resolve.
Well, because the second one starts off with, okay, well, Will and Elizabeth are fighting, and I think it's because Will's trying to protect Elizabeth. It's been a while since I watched these movies.
Yeah.
But, and so then she gets this, she gets the compass from Jack, and Jack's like, well, that will lead you to your heart's desire. And he thinks it's Will, so he thinks I'll point to wherever the treasure is, because Will's on Davy Jones's. I'm getting there by talking about it. Yes. And instead, like, at one point, it points to Jack, and Elizabeth looks at that. I don't think she ever considers Jack as an actual romantic interest, but, like, they play with it.
Right.
And then, of course, I think Jack likes women. And so there's a woman on a ship.
Sure.
And so he likes her. And so Elizabeth straight up sacrifices Jack. Is like, listen, you're staying here, and she uses her kiss for him to keep him there.
Yeah.
And then abandons him on the boat and tells everyone else, yeah, no, he stayed behind of his own free will, even though that was not the case.
Yeah.
And then the third one's about them coming back together. I mean, I'd say, obviously, the first three movies of the Pirates, definitely, the center is around Will and Elizabeth. I mean, the center is around the plot, but, like, the main romance is there, and it's an integral part to the movie.
That's fair. And like I said, it was probably just a weak argument that I wanted to make. But
that's fine. It's a valid one, because have I watched any of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies after Will and Elizabeth are gone? I think I watched one.
I watched the fourth one.
I think I watched the fourth one, and then realized when I couldn't remember anything about that movie after watching it, that I just wasn't fully interested. Because Jack became a caricature.
Yeah, they tried to give him a romantic interest in that one, in Penelope Cruz. She was Blackbeard's daughter. And it was, if I'm entirely honest, hard to take Jack Sparrow seriously as a character who would have a romance.
Right. And that's the thing, when you make a character so caricaturized, it's hard to root for them on a, like, more serious note.
Yeah.
And I think Pirates of the Caribbean 1, Jack, could have had a romance.
Yeah. But by the time it got to that point.
By the third movie, no. And so anything after that, no.
Right. And then a more recent example was The Lost City with Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum.
Oh, that was so much fun.
It was a lot of fun.
If you haven't seen it, please watch it. I don't think we're going to try and spoil too much of it.
No.
I don't think we'll spoil anything of it. I mean, it's an adventure romance. It's really fun. Also, guys, don't sleep on Dan
Daniel Radcliffe.
Being a phenomenal villain.
He's just so much fun. And I will get up on my soapbox and say, stop trying to make Channing Tatum a tough action hero when all he wants to do is to be a soft romance boy and dance.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but you know what? He can also, if you want him to be a lead man, have him be a leading man in adventure romance.
Sure.
Because he played that so fantastically.
You would never be able to tell that he was, like, he came up through the pipeline of, like, raunchy comedies and, like, action movies.
He came up through WWE, didn't he?
Channing Tatum? No.
No. Oh, my bad.
Who were you thinking of?
John Cena.
John Cena. He did come up through the WWE.
Sorry, whoa.
We can cut that.
I got my white man crossed.
A common problem.
I just want another note of a really good adventure romance.
Yeah.
The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. That's a great one.
Yeah. And it's a strange movie because, like, they found literally everyone they cast is attractive.
Yeah,
Like,
it's true.
There are no, like, mid-attractive people in there. It's all hotties.
All hotties. And you know what? That's okay.
That's great. But yes, The Lost City is probably the most recent, like, thing I would classify as an adventure romance.
I think I'd agree. I don't think we've seen any come out recently. I mean, feel free to leave comments if there's other ones.
Yeah. We're surprisingly okay with being proven wrong because We're just kind of talking off the cuff here.
Sometimes we like to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
I don't always, but I will concede. Like, if you watched our us playing video games together on the YouTubes,
That's true.
you might see I don't like being proven wrong. Lucky for me, you don't get to see my proven wrong reactions. I just get to stew in them after I watched the video and realized that I was the one who made a mistake. Anyway, so leave comments on if you know of any other adventure romance ones, any ones that are newer, or even your favorite tropes. But I think this is a good transition. We're going to go a little away from movies, and we're going to talk about romance in video games.
Right, because while movies are a story told to you, and books as well, and TV shows, video games are interactive. So by their very definition, they have to be different. But there are plenty of games where you can experience romance firsthand. You have an active hand in participating in and shaping that romance.
And a lot of ones where you get to choose your romantic interests.
Right. Which
versus being told, hey, this is the person your character is going to fall in love
right.
with. Which is fine. There's different styles of storytelling for sure, but
Right.
I think we like the ones where we get to pick.
Yeah, and we will start, as we always do, with Mass Effect.
Yeah.
Because, it wasn't the first game that did romance, but BioWare, the company that makes it, definitely puts an emphasis on it. And Mass Effect definitely upset the Satanic Panic crowd, the very alarmist crowd, because there was a big controversy that it was basically just a sex simulator.
Oh.
Which I don't know if I've ever talked to you about.
It's so funny because the romance I go with in Mass Effect would not be considered a sex simulator for me.
And the romances in Mass Effect 1 were slightly more, I don't want to say more, like, graphic, but they definitely gave you, like, a peek at some bare hips, maybe a little side boob. But people were up in arms that it was just a sex simulator, which after playing the game once, I was like, that's laughable, because in order to sleep with someone in Mass Effect, you have to talk to them constantly. You have to find out their likes, their dislikes. You have to actually, like, get to know them as a person.
You have to spend time with them.
Yeah. It's hard. It's more of a relationship simulator. Because you actually have to go in and, like, choose the right dialogue options. You have to pick the right, like, shape the conversation in a way that they enjoy.
I'll say more so in the second and third games, for sure. Because the first, at least for me, the first game, I just wanted to find out more about this guy. Didn't really, like, I thought he was a cool guy. Didn't really have any interest in romancing him at all, but I just thought he was a cool guy. And because I talked to him so much, he was like, oh, I like you. And I was like, oh, no.
You can say his name. We can name and shame.
Name and shame. Caden Alonco.
Yep.
Oh, my boy Caden.
He is a very interesting character.
He
but, like,
is. I find him very interesting. The fact that he's in constant pain
Right.
is very intriguing. We're going to have to talk about Mass Effect on that, because I could go on.
But that is, like, there's, like, a very thin line where if you cross it, he's like, I thought we had a connection.
Yes. Like, yeah. You need to be careful, because also you talk to the other one, Liara, who is the other love interest in the first game. She's also someone, if you talk to a lot, she's like, oh, are you interested?
Right.
Which, for her, makes more sense. She's a little more awkward, and so she's kind of just like, she doesn't really understand. I mean, she's an alien, so she doesn't understand humans as well, so she's just like, does this mean something?
Yeah,
do you like me?
That offers, like, a lot of ground to cover for, like, I don't know if this person is being nice or if they're expressing interest in me. And then there comes a point where she just has to straight up ask you.
Yep.
And that answer is basically, like, what determines of, like, no, I am getting to know you because I'm romantically interested in you.
I will say, when it comes to, like, the second and third games, the romance, I think, becomes trickier than the first game. Because now you're dealing with new characters.
It gets messy.
And it gets messy. And there are some characters in Mass Effect that you can just sleep with if you want.
Right, and that's something that I found very interesting is the character of Jack. She comes in, I mean, you break her out of prison, that's how you find her. And if you start to talk to her in between missions, she literally stops you and says, are you, do you want to sleep with me? And if you say yes, you'll sleep with her, but after that, she will stop talking to you because she's going, well, they got what they wanted.
Yep.
And then after that, she just stops talking to you. However, if you say no, I don't want to sleep with you, I just want to get to know you, that triggers something in her where she says, that's different than anyone who's tried to get to know me in the past. If they don't want to sleep with me, then what do they want? Yeah. And that's when you start to break down her walls that she puts up. And that's when you start to get to know her a lot better.
Yes. I wasn't talking about her, but yes.
Who are you talking about?
Well, there's just certain characters that are on the ship that are kind of down. You, don't really form, they're not really part of your crew. I'm going to blank on
Kelly.
Kelly,
She's
She's, I mean, you can form a relationship with her, but you can also sleep with her and then also form a relationship with someone else.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, you need to be careful because people don't always like when you're going around the ship and being with other people, and it makes you think.
They structured the romances in that game, specifically in Mass Effect 2, so that in 2 you cannot romance any of the people who you romanced in Mass Effect 1. Because they are either indisposed, no spoilers, they are upset with you, or they are not present. So it's basically it's up to you to go, okay, well, am I going to start a new romance with someone else? Am I going to, just wait until this person comes around or they come back? There's a ton of depth to it, which is really cool.
What I like also about Mass Effect and a few other games that we're going to talk about is the tropes show up in these ones as well. Yes. My favorite romance in Mass Effect, I mean, people might call it basic. I call it the correct choice. You can romance Garrus Vakarian. And the thing I love about romancing him is he is literally your best friend through all 3 games. He is by your side. He never, he doesn't, he might get mad at you, but he never, holds things against you. Right. And that's different than some other characters that you can romance. They can hold things against you, but he's always by your side. You say something, he's there for you. And just having that person be so close. And the thing is, even if you don't romance him, he is always there by your side. Right. It's not because you romance him that makes him there.
We compared notes after you finished Mass Effect 3, and one of his last lines he says to you is, there is no Shepard without Vakarian. Basically saying, there is no you without me. We're in this together all the way. Yep. And he says that to your character regardless of whether you romanced him or not.
When I found that out, I swooned so hard for that.
He is there regardless of whether you are dating or not. He is just there for you in every reality.
And how can you choose someone who's not that? Oh my gosh. See, that's why, I try and romance other people. It's so hard playing FemShep and trying to romance other people when Garrus is right there, right next to you, there for you, always there. And it's so hard because he's just...
So I think Mass Effect is different than a lot of games with romance in it, specifically its counterpart, Dragon Age, because a lot of Dragon Age is you giving gifts of hey, I found this thing that you will like, you should take this. Or just doing things for them, in Baldur's Gate or Cyberpunk, where it's yes, you can romance them, but it's mostly just hey, I chose to do this quest that the game told me to do. Whereas Mass Effect, it's completely optional. You don't have to romance anyone, or you can romance several people, and they'll get upset with you for it.
Yep, and also another thing I think about with Dragon Age, you can go on. I mean, Dragon Age has this too. They have what we call loyalty missions, right? And some of those can lead to romance missions. I'd say, especially, not real much spoilers at all, but like the new Dragon Age, the Veilguard, I feel like depending on if you're choosing a romance with someone, these missions will open up in a different way for you. But like with Mass Effect, they have loyalty missions, but you can do them for all your crew. I think Dragon Age you can too, for the most part. But it's like, and that will create loyalty from them, but it doesn't necessarily help your romance.
Right.
It's a whole separate thing.
Right. It's like how much do they trust you versus what are their feelings on you, which is cool. So I think the last thing I really wanted to talk about was with video game romances is with a lot of these games, Mass Effect, Dragon Age, and Cyberpunk to an extent, is that it's usually following the plot of the game of you kind of getting closer to them, and then it culminates in like a romantic scene of you spending the night with them, whatever that means for that character. I think Mass Effect Citadel, the DLC, which is basically just all fan service, kind of breaks that tradition because that is the only part of the game where you feel like your relationship is the status quo. Whereas most of the time they're like, yeah, they're close. And I think Dragon Age, the new Dragon Age, is also better about acknowledging that characters are kind of like hooking up. But Mass Effect, it's sort of just like, oh yeah, they're on the team. And then at the end of the game, you sleep with them and then the game ends. You know? Whereas like in Citadel, there's a point where your love interest basically comes in and they refer to themselves as your significant other, your boyfriend or girlfriend. And it's like throughout the story of that DLC, like they are in a different role because they are your love interest. And that's, I think, something that's incredibly hard to do because then you have to plan that contingency for each and every romance in the game.
Yeah.
And you have to record lines for that and you have to like program that in. But I think games are starting to realize that it's more fun to be in a relationship with somebody than to like forge a relationship with somebody where it's like you kind of want that like, hey, we are in a relationship, like what does that mean for us? And it's the adventure romance of like we're going through this together.
Well, right, and it's like, yes, it's fun to forge a relationship, but it's also like, okay, I did that, and that's it.
Right.
Like, I still have the whole game left, and I don't get any new content with my new boo? Like, what are you talking about?
I think...
Like, that's I can't stand that in games where it's like, cool, we got the romance. That's it for them.
Yeah.
They're not going to acknowledge anything. I mean, there might be a line said in the back when you're walking somewhere, but there's no, like, cutscenes. All of that's done with. Like, nothing else.
And I think it's, like, a little bit of a shift, too, because it's, like, I think when Mass Effect first came out, that was rare. It was, like, oh, you got your prize. Your prize was the sex. But, like, I think people are, like, a little bit different, especially in these long RPG games, where it's, like, well, no, I want to, like, go through that with, like, a different partner, or, like, see how that changes the game. So...
Yeah. So.
I also wanted to give a shout out to Fire Emblem, which is like the romance is a mechanical difference in the game, because I'm going to start with Awakening, which spoilers for Fire Emblem Awakening.
It's so good, play it.
Pause the podcast, go play it.
Yes, please go play it. It is such a fun game. If you got into Baldur's Gate and you kind of like that turn-based style, it's a turn-based style game, and the storyline is just so good. So pause, go play that, and then come back and we'll have spoilers.
Spoilers will now commence. So the Fire Emblem Awakening is basically this person shows up and they're in a mask. You don't know who they are. And at some point the mask comes off, you realize that it is like the guy you're with, the prince or whatever his title is, it's his daughter from the future, which is like a total mind-blown thing. But from that point on, once you you can like push characters together in Fire Emblem. If they fight next to each other, they get higher relationship score.
Yeah, because they work together on the battlefield.
So if you get it high enough, they will start a relationship. And in Fire Emblem Awakening, as soon as that happens, I'm talking the minute you get them to that level where they start a relationship, their child comes flying out of the timeline. And
I love it so much.
It's wild. But the fun thing is that they are for like the real min-maxer game players out there, that means that you can push characters together to make the perfect soldier. The perfect child soldier.
I mean, and okay, for the people not on the min-max level of it, what I also find fun is they have dialogue and scenes for every combination of person. Might not be as much, but if you're pushing two people together, you go to your camp, there will be a moment between the two of them. And it's super cute, and that like happens at every stage of the relationship until they finally get together. And then it's so amazing because all of a sudden it's like, hey, this person showed up and they're from the future timeline and they're the kid of these two guys over here and they got a personality about them.
Right. It's like, imagine if like you were getting really close to someone, you have that talk, you kiss them, you're like, yeah, we're gonna try this, and all of a sudden someone shows up and they're like, I'm your kid from the future, and it's like, this is way too much. I'm overwhelmed. I want to shut down.
So I will say, it's not really a romance trope. And I know it's not very a trope. Yeah. It doesn't happen very often. But I am a sucker.
It is just a wild take on romance, though.
No, but here's the thing. I am a sucker for when kids go back in time to see their parents around their same age. It is wild. It's not very common. It happens. It's like there's sprinklings here and there, I think.
Well, because you're a Trunks girly from DBZ.
I am a Trunks girly from Dragon Ball Z. And when he first shows up, he shows up before he's even born in this timeline. And when you find that out, it's just like,
yeah. And there's a little bit of the Back to the Future uncomfortableness where like Bulma is like weirdly drawn to him, like his mother is weirdly drawn to him.
Well, and to be fair, I think it's been a while since I watched it, but I think, like, the reason she's drawn is because it is her child, but she doesn't know that.
Right, and I think there's, like, something about, like, oh, well, there's something about me in there. There's something about this guy I like in there. Mm-hmm. So, like, that's, like, I get why people are drawn to that. It's just, like, it very much reminded me of Back to the Future, where it's like... my mom is hitting on me now.
Well, see, and the thing that I find fun is not the hit on part. It's the kid like come and then
the kid gets to be a peer to his parents, their parents.
Yes, and that can just be fun dynamics,
right? And
in a story, and it doesn't like I said, it's not super common, but it's common enough that it's been in a few things, and it happened in Awakening, which was great.
Are you going to talk about Three Houses?
Three Houses, yeah.
Which is different. It's a little bit of the. There's a little bit of time travel. I can't figure out what I'm trying to say. So you start teaching at this school, and at first I was very uncomfortable with it because they're like, look at all these students, you can romance them. Which is really weird because you're a teacher, even though you're the same age. You are their superior. And then there's basically a time skip where you do not exist for 5 years and you come back and everyone else has grown up. Mm-hmm. And then you can basically, like, no romance can actually happen until that point.
No romance can happen while there's a teacher-student relationship. You can form bonds with them, and you, the player, knows that's where it's leading to, but nothing happens until there's a time skip.
But you don't know that the first time you play the game.
You don't know that the first time you're playing
That's what I'm trying to say. That's why I'm uncomfortable with it. And then after that, I'm like, oh, everything is fine. This is fine.
See now, Fire Emblem, the other one, what one's it called? Fates. See, that one's interesting because you grow up.
You grow up in one kingdom.
In one kingdom, but you were born with another kingdom. You get like basically grown up with it, and there's something about it because there is something where you can still romance from the family, the birthplace that you come from.
Right.
I don't know what it is.
Basically, a lot of your
are
romance
not
options are your
siblings.
Yeah.
It's so okay. It sounds bad.
And I think there's a point where you have to choose one kingdom or the other. They force you to choose
secret option.
That's what I'm getting at.
Sorry.
Is there is a secret option C where if you buy a DLC, you can say, "I'm not choosing either of you. You guys follow me or don't or get out," basically.
And
I think in that path you discover that you are actually you're not actually biologically related to any
anyone.
of them.
Yes, which is why you can romance any of them. However, it is very weird trying to romance someone who you technically grew up with, thinking they're your sibling. Anyway, but I do like that game because tangent from the romance. But depending on what kingdom you support, the game is different. The ending is different. What happens is different. And that game lends itself to so many playthroughs because you find out different information based on your choices.
Right.
And certain things happen because of your choices. That's why the secret option C of not choosing, I feel like tells you way more than you would have found out either way.
Right.
And I highly recommend that game. I like a lot of the Fire Emblem games. I don't think we played the most recent one that came out.
Engage. Yeah, I bought it and then my Switch died.
Oh yeah.
We're still working on that.
We need to get that fixed. But yes, if you haven't heard of Fire Emblem and you like a little bit of romance in your games, you like that turnstile-based game, you found that through Baldur's Gate, check it out.
I love turn-based strategy.
Chris is a big on that turn-based strategy. It took me a while to get on board. I think I finally got on board. I now want to go play Fire Emblem.
All right. Well, that's a good spot to wrap up, I think. We have plenty in here where if you found something that we got wrong, please tell us.
Oh, yes, please. Let us know if we made fools of ourselves.
You can give us a comment on YouTube, or if you're on a podcast service, you can give us an email at couplethatslaystogether@gmail.com.
Or you can also comment on the podcast
service.
You? Yes, you can do that
on
the podcast, yeah. So feel free to comment wherever. Yeah. Also, feel free to send us an email. If any of these topics are ones that you want us to expand on, I know we were talking about a lot of different
this was kind of a rapid fire one.
This one was a rapid fire. Also, very big on the very general of a subject topic. Yeah. But if there's anything we talked about that you wanna just listen to us dive deep more on, for any reason, doesn't have to be romance. I guarantee you we're going to talk about Mass Effect. We're going to talk about Dragon Age.
Yeah, this is our second episode. We've got a lot of topics ahead of us, and we're also very open to suggestions.
Yes. So if you have something that you think you want to listen to us talk about, feel free to suggest it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
But anyway, hope everyone has a good Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Listening. Thank you for listening. I did it.
Yay.
Nailed it. First try.
Woo.
And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.